Are Vineyard.
Somos Viña.
We Are Vineyard.
That fall, as I got to know Scott, the guy, the fraternity guy, he kept asking me this question when we would hang out. He goes, Jason, what happens if all the satisfaction in life you're looking for is actually found in the Lordship of Jesus? And I would oftentimes say, I don't know. I don't know if I want to talk about that right now. You know, and I would punt the ball down the field. But he'd be faithful just to kindly bring it back up in my face. And that whole week at Christmas conference, I was just like, wow, I've never seen a community like this.
Yeah.
I've never seen people take their faith seriously my age like this. And I've actually encountered, I feel like I could feel and sense a presence that for myself, that I was just like, this is so different.
Yep.
And I knew the Bible because it was ingrained in me.
Right.
But this was the first time it felt conversant.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. In today's episode, our host, Jay Pathick, talks with Jason George, the Chief Development Officer for Vineyard USA and the newest member of our national team. Let's listen in.
Well, Jason, thanks for joining me for this. You just started in this position, so it's like, you just start and then you're on the podcast, like boom. So
yeah.
So your catch up is pretty strong. But you went in, you did your homework, listened to some of the podcasts, and
I did, and it was quite entertaining at times.
Yeah, we did talk about that a bit. Yeah, Nijay, you're now joining the Nijay alternate universe. You're in a similar universe as the two of us.
And ironically, my name is Jason, so I guess I am.
We're
universe adjacent.
We're all there. We're all
Central
there.
Central Ohio,
Indian, Ohio. Campus Crusade, all of it. So yeah, we'll get to all that. But let's start where stories should start, which is where you were born and where you grew up. Okay,
born Toledo, Ohio, but I grew up mostly in Columbus. The way I remember it. You remember the stories as a kid from when you're younger than 10, but
sure,
my memory for that kind of stuff is very vague.
Yeah,
but my parents came over in 1970. And my dad was kind of the patriarch of the Indian community in Toledo.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And so my family was well known in the Indian community up there.
That's cool. Which part of India?
My parents are from Kerala.
Kerala, yep. Okay.
Yeah. So my dad came in. My mom and my dad both grew up in the faith, not Hindu faith, but the Christian faith.
Yep.
Mom was Marthamite, so it's an offshoot of Catholicism or Orthodoxy. I can never keep straight which one. There's a Jacobite and a Marthamite. I don't know which is Catholic, which is Orthodox.
Right.
And then my dad was one of the Pentecostal tribe. So he was an Assemblies guy.
And how many generations for them? Were they
so
1 or 2, or is it
So this is where the Indian folklore comes in that I never know what to believe.
Oh, I know. But that's okay. It's fun. This is entertaining.
But according to my dad, as a kid, I was told that we come from the line of Thomas's first converts.
There you go. That's why I was going to ask.
So basically, my dad's family was historically Brahmin.
Yep.
And so the story goes, Thomas saw my great whatever bathing in a river. They started talking and they started debating. I don't know what a debate looked like back then.
Right.
So Thomas threw out the challenge. He said, if your God is God, throw the water up and command the water to stay in the air. And the Brahmin did. He threw the water up, water fell back up in his face. So his God's not God. Thomas says, do it again. He throws it up in the air, and he said, "In the name of Jesus, be still." And the water just hovered. And the Brahmin then said, "Your God is Lord." Water falls on his face, and he's baptized.
Oh, dude. There's more than one thing happening there at the same time. This is so great. Oh, dude.
So this was the story I was told as a kid. I didn't know what to believe, but it's part of the folklore. So supposedly,
cool.
I just don't know if it's one of those things where it's such a communal culture.
Right.
That maybe it was a cousin of a cousin of a cousin.
Sure. Yeah, but hey, somewhere near your family line.
Yeah.
Back to Thomas. And have you been, how many times have you been to India? Did you go a lot
twice,
as a kid?
Twice as a baby, and once as a 10-year-old. That was the last time.
Fascinating.
I've been all over the world, but India is one of those places where, you probably know this, but when you go back to India, you have to go at least a month.
Oh, it's forever.
Just to see everybody.
Totally. No. If you show up and you don't see all the people, that is like
you've offended someone.
Not going. Totally.
You've offended someone and their mother, literally.
Yes, precisely. Yeah. Well, the only reason I ask is because I've been in that church in Goa where, they say it's Thomas's hand. They have like a relic of his hand or whatever, and there is a lot of historical data to say that Thomas was in southern India, So if you actually trace the history of his missionary journey, Kerala would have been the first state he hit, right,
in India, and then he moved across, going east toward Chennai or Madras, whichever one you're more familiar with.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think, if I remember right, his tomb is in Chennai.
Yeah. But there's like parts of him. I don't know how all that, do people dismember him? I don't know how that works. But anyway, there's, wow, that is so cool. That's kind of cool.
It is cool. I mean, and like, I think with it comes a lot of interesting religiosity.
Sure.
Community.
Yeah. Totally.
And so,
well, that's any community. I mean, that's, I've been all over different parts of Ethiopia that claim the Ethiopian eunuch is their forefather, from Acts. And,
okay.
Yeah, because there's vestiges of the church. I mean, we can see historically from, like the first century. So, it's like, well, somebody did something here where people were following Jesus. So why not the Ethiopian? I mean, there's no reason it wouldn't be that. And so, but then there's all the requisite amount of like weird stuff that comes with that. But then, so it's interesting. So then your dad is in the Pentecostal space, which means somewhere around that turn of the century, or maybe before, he's in with a group of believers that have these encounters with the Holy Spirit.
Yep.
Because that's the other interesting dynamic about worldwide faith is how many people identify Pentecostal, but the truth is they had been moving in the Spirit even before what we would call the birth of Pentecostal movement.
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially in the Orthodox faith too.
Exactly. Exactly.
In the Indian, I mean, like when you read church history, you see the Orthodoxy stories of the move of the Spirit, but even like in some of the stories Dad would tell, about like people like from generations before, because that's what old Indian dads do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's storytelling. That's part of the deal, man. Yeah.
But it was like, really, I didn't think this. In my head, I was like, was Pentecostalism around back then? But then it's just like. And then that's when he started to kind of explain there was a Catholic shoot and an Orthodox shoot.
Yeah. Totally.
In the Christian communities in Kerala. So I didn't really understand it at the time because I was, junior high school when he was trying to explain all this to me.
You just don't care. You're just like, are the Cavs winning or not? I mean, that's what I really want to know.
I was more Browns and Buckeyes.
Oh, okay. Good. All right. Well,
I'm a Tribe Indians fan. Well, Guardians fan too.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So, okay. So because that's an interesting dynamic when you look at global historical Christian faith is how many are like, yeah, there was a move of God through the Pentecostal movement, but it's not like we were waiting for you guys to show up and talk about the Holy Spirit. We were seeing experience. And it's interesting how many parallel, like there's a Catholic charismatic renewal and even a Pentecostal renewal that happens independent. So they would have descriptions of prayer meetings around the same time where the Holy Spirit fell in different rooms. But then through church history, there's different movements in Africa, South America, Southeast Asia. They're like, no, we were doing all these things. It's just you guys showed up with a fresh move. And so we were kind of a part of that movement. So anyway, it's always interesting to me when you hear Pentecostals from other parts of the world, how often they're like, yeah, we'd call ourselves Pentecostal, but we were sort of doing all that. There was just a fresh move of the Spirit. But whereas in the U.S., it was like, no, this is like, you kind of just kicks off in a certain way, or in the Western world. But so your parents then obviously get married in India. Mm-hmm. And then what made them decide, of all the places in the world we want to be in Toledo, Ohio. This is the place for us.
So my dad lived in Kuwait and worked with Getty Oil for years.
Oh, interesting. Did
really well. I mean, he was one of those guys who languages came easy. I mean, he knew a bunch of Indian dialects. He picked up Arabic along the way. I think my mom told me, he was fluent in 5 or 6 languages.
Wow.
I wish I had that gift, because that would have helped me when I was overseas.
Yeah, no doubt.
But he came to the conclusion that, I have 3 older sisters. I'm the youngest by 9 years for my youngest sister. So he was just thinking long-term for their life. And, he wanted them to have a better opportunity than what he saw in Kuwait or what he saw in India. And so they made the move. So it was a pretty sacrificial step, because he was doing really well in the oil business back in that day. So that's where he ended up moving toward the States. I still don't know how they ended out in Toledo. That's the mystery to me. I think it has to come down to the fact of there was a cousin at some point who came to the States, and he happened to be in Ohio.
Right.
And so his connections through Getty Oil, he was able to land a good job in Toledo with a manufacturing company called the Vildes. Mm-hmm. And then they were a big provider for Owens Corning was up there, Jeep was up there, and the Vildes was doing business with both. And so, I think that's how they ended out there, but don't quote me on that one.
No, that sounds right. It's usually a cousin, an uncle, an aunt. Somebody is near a certain part of the country, maybe a community, an Indian community of some kind. Then you just start applying for jobs nearest to there, and then you find a job that seems to fit. But it almost always starts with family or adjacent family, and then a job. It's usually not the other way around. It's not a job, and then I'll find somebody. It's the other way around. There's family, and then I'll find a job.
And so the funny thing is, I grew up in Toledo, didn't know any different. Then when my 2 older sisters graduated from University of Toledo, they moved on to Columbus. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize how Indian we were until that moment when my family was like, well, I guess we're moving down to Columbus.
You're like, wait a minute, why? Yeah. Right.
That's where it was really interesting, because I got to see my mom do something that I just never really thought possible. She went to the phone book back in the day and just started looking up and seeing Indian names and starting calling people.
Wow.
And she helped build the community that we had in the Columbus area through just doing that.
Wow.
And so it's interesting to see how much community drove my family in so many ways that I didn't really understand it at the time.
Dude, that's so cool. And so in Toledo, was there an Indian church, or are you just in another church with an Indian community?
We were We were at a church, Pentecostal church called Cathedral of Praise.
Mm-hmm.
And it was it was diverse-ish, but it wasn't Indian. Like, my parents did the Indian Christian conferences and stuff like that too.
Okay.
So that was a whole different
Yeah, they're like parallel
dynamic.
worlds. Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And like, that's where I learned how to sit through a 3-hour prayer meeting and just think about things without actually moving.
Right.
I mean, I don't
count ceiling tiles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
right.
So after my parents moved there, it started to feel like, at least from what I understand, that other families started to join in.
Right.
And so Toledo, over the next 10, 15 years, really did become a place where there was a stronger Indian community. And it felt like my parents were kind of in the hub of it.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Huh. Okay. So then how old are you when you moved to Columbus?
10.
10. So that's, it's a pretty pivotal moment to move. So you move at 10 because your sisters are down in Columbus. So I guess we're going to Columbus.
Yeah. And then, so my sisters, one of my sisters was, even though she grew up Pentecostal, she decided she'd be more cessationist. So she went Baptist, and totally fine. Like, she loves Jesus. Amazing.
That's cool.
Woman, and her husband's awesome. And they went to a great Baptist church here in the Columbus area.
Cool.
And my dad was really worried about me. And so he wanted me to be in a Christian school. So I went to the Christian school based out of my sister's church.
Yep.
This little thing called Maranatha Christian School.
Yeah, man. I know it.
I know you do.
Yep.
So that's actually where I met your wife and your sister-in-law back in junior high.
Yep.
And I felt like I was kind of the outlier of the school because my dad's super Pentecostal.
Yeah. And
there I am in a very Baptist Christian school. So I didn't know what to make of life or faith or anything because I felt like I was getting it from every which way.
Yeah.
My dad was also very, very strict in the Indian sense. Like, you have some Indian families who they're all about education, which my dad was. But for most Indian families who are Hindu or non-Christian oriented, it revolves around becoming a doctor, becoming an engineer, becoming a scientist of some sort. For me, my dad was obsessed with me learning the Bible, and which I was fine with. I mean, I made do with it. But I mean, he had me on Bible quiz team when I was a little kid. I mean, do you know these kind of things? Have you ever heard of these kind of things, or am I just that weird?
I've heard legend of these things. I only know because I've, obviously I'm around Christian kids now. But like, what did they call? It's called a sword drill.
Yes.
You hold your Bible up, and then they say a passage, and you flip it down, and you got to find it and read it. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So that's the kind of mentality I grew up with as a kid. Mm-hmm. I mean, my dad made me learn 1 Corinthians, like memorize it for Bible quiz team.
Dude, that's cool.
Yeah, not so much when I was that age.
I mean, let's put it this way. I wish I had 1 Corinthians memorized. Like, for me to do that now would be a lot harder.
Oh, no way. I mean, yeah, I probably smoked too much pot to really remember it nowadays.
There is that problem too. Yeah.
So, but I mean, there was a time but it was the case where I ran through the motions.
Yeah.
Because that's what Dad drilled into me.
You're told to do. Yep. That's right. Yep. So then you're in that whole world. Your sisters are out of the house.
Yep.
By then.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so are you effectively like an only child then? Like, in the way that...
So it's different. So it's kind of yes and kind of no. So when we're in Columbus, we moved in with my second oldest sister.
Okay.
And we lived with her. And then when she got married, my youngest sister moved in with us because she just finished college.
Right.
So I always had a sister in the house.
Right.
And so they were kind of the bridges between me and my parents growing up, honestly. because I don't know if it was like this for you, but there was enough of a culture gap.
Right.
And I didn't want to associate with being Indian.
Right.
But I didn't want to associate with being white when I hit high school. I just wanted
because tell me about that. So you're home, you're eating Indian food, you're listening to Indian music, there's Indians around. Then you go to school.
Well, I wouldn't say Indian. Well, my mom was listening to Indian music.
Okay.
I mean, there'd always be the Indian prayer line.
Right.
Or
wow.
in some sort of Indian worship music being played in the background.
Yeah.
But for me, it was very Christian, 80s, 90s Christian culture.
Okay. Yep.
And so, like, I remember leaving Maranatha, going up Arlington High School, and someone, I just met this kid and we started talking and hanging out. And he introduced me to U2. And I was like, holy crap, there's more to life than Michael W. Smith. You've got to be kidding me. Like, my mind was blown. And then, after that, I got into like the rap, hip hop.
Yeah.
And it was just a whole different world because that's not what I grew up with.
Right. But you're hiding the CDs. The
Pretty
whole
much.
thing. Yeah. Right.
Pretty
right.
much.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if you know the stand-up comedian Nate Bargatze. Have you ever seen that dude? He's very funny.
I've seen him once.
Dude, he's so funny.
Did he have a Netflix or Amazon special?
Yeah. And he's got a new stand-up out, and one of the things he says, he goes, my parents became Christians in the 90s, which meant we were the most Christian. and he just describes like music and parties and prayer meetings and small groups in their house and all this whole world of that. So it's interesting listening to you. So you have like super Indian, super Christian. Those things are crisscrossing a bit, but not all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have like just secular upper middle class high school.
Yep.
All three things happening at the same time.
Yeah. And it was
bouncing
funny
between worlds. Yeah.
And I was just trying to figure out life.
Right.
I mean,
of course.
Because like going from a small Christian school to a Division I public high school, I mean, it was a different ballgame. I played all the sports that my junior high had to offer, and then I come to, D1 high school, and I'm like, holy cow, this is a whole different level of competition.
Oh, it's a whole world.
So,
yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And so it was, between all of the, just the typical teenage things, I had to learn a whole new culture in a lot of ways.
Yep. Yep.
And,
that's exactly
I don't think I understood it at the time, but that's where I was like, oh, I need to figure out how to balance life between the two worlds.
Yeah. Well, or three worlds.
Yeah.
I mean, like that's, yeah. And for, obviously people would know this listening, but I mean, I was in high school, what would be, 2 districts away from where you were. So we're in the same area. In our high school, your high schools were rivals for us in all kinds of sports. So like,
yeah,
I grew up playing tennis. And so Upper Arlington was like main competition for us.
Yeah.
Like super intense, 2 upper middle class, almost entirely white school districts battling.
I think I might have been one of 8 minorities in the class of 400.
Right. Same with me. Yeah, it was right around that number. Yeah. Wow. So that's interesting. So yeah, we have very parallel stories. Okay. So all that's happening.
So I started playing baseball because that was the one sport I could hang with.
Yep.
But I was never very good. I was just a JV scrub, but I still had fun.
Yeah.
But that's where I also got introduced to the party scene.
Yep.
That's where, I made it clear in my head. I was like, okay, the space stuff I can do with my family on the weekends, but this is what I want to do right now. And I don't think I ever really took faith genuinely seriously for a long time.
Right.
I now understand, looking back, 2020, hindsight's 2020, that it was always part of the air I breathed.
Right.
And it was always part of the foundation that was built into me.
Yep.
And it gave me my curiosity when it came to just understanding philosophy of life,
Mm-hmm.
why people are motivated the way they're motivated.
Mm-hmm.
I love the debate because of my dad. And so, yeah, it was an interesting time of life.
Yeah. Yeah. And in that time, where are you? You're not. Are you still going to the Baptist church that the school was in, or are you
No,
bouncing around?
We were okay. So my dad had us planted in an Assemblies of God church.
Okay, cool.
Every Sunday, and it was, small youth group. It was me and like 5 other kids.
Okay.
But there were people who genuinely love Jesus.
Right.
And the youth pastor at that time, he probably kept me from making a lot of dumb decisions. Pot and alcohol is the normal party scene in a high school space,
Right.
but when you lived in that high school, a lot more was available because there was a lot more money on the table with the kids.
Yeah, totally.
I don't know if Dublin was that way, but that's the way it was where I was.
Totally was that way. Yeah, looking back, I'm like, wow. The only way you could party the way a lot of kids did in high school that I knew is because they could afford it. It was a lot of drugs, like a lot. Not just weed or drinking. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
So for me, it was just simply like, I saw, my friends getting into the acid and stuff like that. And I was just like, no, thank you. And I think a lot of that influence was like Kurt. He was just a great youth pastor. He just talked honestly about stuff.
Yeah. That's cool.
And so I always appreciated him. But I think he also, I don't know. I felt like now looking back, I realize how much of a prayer warrior he was for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in a lot of ways, between the prayers of my parents and Kurt, the Lord was just kind of keeping me out of too much of a mess.
So good. That's great. Okay. So you get through high school, and then you're like, my faith's sort of up in the air, but I know how to do all the Christian things.
Yeah. And so then that's when I started at Ohio State. And I knew I couldn't get through college still smoking pot, so I stopped smoking pot. But just started doing the fraternity thing with my best friend from high school. And I don't really remember the first half of first quarter at Ohio State.
Right.
The first real memory I have is getting a 43% on a math midterm, and I was like, I think I need to kind of figure out a different
settle this down.
So it was at that point where, at that point I was working to pay for school, but I was commuting from home. My normal schedule was go to class, go to work, go to the fraternity house, hang out, party, and go home really late at night. Thankfully, the fraternity house was less than 5 minutes away from Upper Arlington, so it wasn't a huge deal. But my dad noticed the difference after that first math midterm, and I was like, okay, I need to cut back on the party.
Yeah.
So one day he comes in, and he's like, Jason, can I ask you a question? I said, sure, Dad. And he's like, have you ever done drugs or drinking?
Oof.
And as a young kid, I learned a hard lesson of not lying to my dad.
Right.
He was that old school dad who had the big switch, the long, skinny stick.
Right.
And his philosophy was, I will spank you once and you will not forget.
Right. Yep. Yeah, there's a whole generation of that. Yep.
Yeah, so that was me. And so after I learned that lesson of not lying to him, I never ever directly bold-faced lied. I always danced.
Right.
And there was truth always involved in those moments back in, high school and junior high. But in that moment, I just felt full release just to be honest, because he asked such a direct question. So I was like, yes, I have. He's like, how many times? Once or twice? And I said, oh, you could add a couple zeros behind both.
Yeah. Wow.
And he's just like, oh, okay. And I don't think I ever saw a look of disappointment like I did in that moment in my dad's face. So I didn't know what to do with it. But, I just had to get back to my homework. He's like, okay. And he's like, all right. And then he just walked out. About 2 hours later, he walks back in. He knocks on the door, walks back in, and he's like, hey, can you come downstairs? I'm like, sure. I come downstairs, and there's my mom, my 3 sisters, my 2 brother-in-laws at the time. And he was like, all right, tell them what you told me.
Whoa.
So he does a straight intervention for me.
Whoa. Here we go.
And I'm like, okay, this is a different ball game. So, yeah. And I mean, I know you've probably seen those videos where you see tribal women when they're in grief, they're like beating their chest.
They're wailing.
Yeah,
right.
I had no concepts of what that was until that moment when I saw my mom, who, she's like 4'11". I mean, she's probably 140, 150, 160 pounds, a little overweight, sweet little lady, diabetic, high blood pressure. And she just started wailing, started beating her chest.
Wow.
Basically saying, didn't I love you enough? What did I do wrong? And all I kept thinking is, God, if you're there and you can hear me, don't let her die right now. I could not handle that. So, but in my dad's wisdom, he set the table, lit the fuse, and then stepped back. Then my brother-in-law, my Baptist brother-in-law, Rich, he just kind of walked it. He just walked us all through it from that point on. He was like, okay, Jason, what's going on? Like, what do you need? And he's asking me good questions. He's like, and he was even honest enough. He's like, Jason, do you know what you need right now? I was like, yeah, I probably need to be in a community that's faith-filled, and I probably need to be in scripture.
Yeah.
And I remember him telling me, he's like, Jason, he's like, it makes me so sad that you know what you need and you're just not doing it. And I'm like, this is even more depressing than I thought this was going to be.
Yeah, dude, this was bad. It's getting worse by the second. Yeah.
And he's like, he was honest, and he said, I don't want you in the college group I'm leading. I don't think that would be good for you. He's like, I think you need to find people like you. I said, okay, what's that mean? He's like, have you heard of Campus Crusade? And I was like, I think I've heard of them. And I had heard of them because I can't remember if it was your sister-in-law or your wife who I had run into on campus the first couple of weeks, and they invited me to come to a real prime time or a real life meeting.
Prime time. Yeah, it was prime time. Yeah, that's right.
And
wow.
So I remembered it when he said it. And so I was like, okay, I'll go check it out. And so I ended up going a couple weeks later. My family made me promise to go, so I said I would go.
Yep.
And then that Thursday, it was before their fall retreat, and this guy named Chad Brennan came up to me.
Dude, yeah.
I mean, Chad was just like, what are you doing this weekend? And my first instinct was to say nothing with you, but I didn't. I was like, I don't know. Because he was just so energetic and so into it. And that's not where I was. So I was kind of freaking out about the whole thing inside, but I was playing it cool on the outside. I just told him, I was like, I don't know. And he was like, you really should think about fall retreat. And I said, all right, I'll think about it. Didn't think anything of it. And my dad checked in with me right when I got home to see what I thought of it. And I told him what they were doing this weekend. He's like, I'm paying for it. You're going to go. And I'm like, all right, out of respect, I will do it.
Yeah.
And so we were there, and I don't remember what game we were playing. I think it might have been Knockout.
Yeah.
Like, for some reason, everybody was playing Knockout at the rec room that was up at, I think it was called Camp Katubik or something.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking to myself, this is the first time in 4 years I've just had innocent fun.
Yeah.
Like, there's no alcohol anywhere.
Yep.
Everybody's super cool. Like, I don't mind hearing some of this teaching.
Right.
And we were playing with Knockout near the end, and this guy this girl in front of me is like, so what did you think of this weekend so far? I'm like, oh, it's been fun. I was like, actually, it's the first time in 4 years I've had innocent fun. And the guy behind me was like, what do you mean? I'm just like, I'm just used to the party scene. And he's like, what house are you? I'm like, what do you mean what house? He's like, you got that look. And I said, oh, I didn't know I had a look. And I was like, well, I'm going to be pledging Delta Chi. He's like, I'm ex-Phi Tau. And I'm like, really? And I was super intrigued because he was the first returning guy I'd met that whole weekend. And I was like, oh. And he just kind of took me under his wing and just started hanging out with me that weekend. And he was consistent in my life. And he asked me to join his Bible study. And I was like, okay, maybe. But then more involvement led to me going to Christmas conference. Wasn't sure about it, but my sister saw the brochure on my bed. And she's like, Jason, Christmas conference changed my life. She's like, I was like, that's great, but I can't afford it. I'm paying for school. She's like, Merry Christmas, you're going, I will pay.
Wow.
And I was like, okay. So I went not knowing what to think about anything. And a lady named Kay Arthur was the speaker.
Yeah.
And she was big in the inductive Bible study method stuff back in the late 90s, mid 90s. I remember it was during that phase when it felt like there was always a debate about women in ministry. And she took it head on. Like, she was kind of cool that way. I remember almost every night she would say, for those of you who are uncomfortable with a woman preacher, because men in my generation wouldn't stand up. So I chose to. She's like, and she said it multiple times. And she's like, and I'll stay here until one of you men come to take it from me.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, I was like, that's pretty cool. But then December 31st, 1995, she did this massive altar call. And it just, there was something about that moment where I was like, no, this is what I've been longing for. Because that fall, as I got to know Scott, the fraternity guy, he kept asking me this question when we would hang out. He goes, Jason, what happens if all the satisfaction in life you're looking for is actually found in the Lordship of Jesus? And I would oftentimes say, I don't know. I don't know if I want to talk about that right now. You know, and I would punt the ball down the field. But he'd be faithful just to kindly bring it back up in my face. And that whole week at Christmas conference, I was just like, wow, I've never seen community like this.
Yeah.
I've never seen people take their faith seriously my age like this. And I've actually encountered, like, I feel like I could feel and sense a presence that for myself, that I was just like, this is so different.
Yep.
And I knew the Bible because it was ingrained in me.
Right.
But this was the first time it felt conversant.
Yeah, it was life-giving, right, and connected to community, the way you're describing it. And there's so many things, like you had a little section there. I mean, the intervention is like a movie scene, you know. I wish we could hire actors and just do the whole thing. But it really is. It's fascinating. But it's amazing to me how many folks I know that have a similar story that you have, where faith is like everywhere all the time, super intense. They have some kind of window where they break free. And I think it's important to just pause and say, there are moments when a parent still gets to intervene with an adult kid. Like, I know a lot of people with that story where it saved their life, brought them back into life with Jesus, where, you know, a parent has a moment, they just push all their chips in and go, all right, here's the deal. I have a really good friend, you know, Danielle and I's friends, where she goes away and she's playing college and she's doing the whole party scene, and her dad calls up and is like, something's different with you. Are you okay? And anyway, after a bit of that, he literally shows up with her mom and him, and I think her brother, and says, we talked to the registrar. We're moving you out today. You're done.
Wow.
This is done. Like, you mean too much to us to watch you destroy your life. Wow. This is done today. And of course, as she tells the story at the time, she's like, who do you think you are? Da, da, da. But they're kind of paying. But now she would say, that saved my life. I was on a track that there was not a clear way out. But my parents pushed the chips in and went, now or never. We're doing this.
And And there is that beauty to the story that I have. I mean, I don't think to some people, like, I didn't do the crazy party.
No. But for you were coming apart. Right.
I was. And that was the thing. Like, there was a lot of other stuff going on in my life that I was just like, I just don't know who I am or what I'm becoming.
Totally.
Or what I want to become. I think what's beautiful about that is what you said. It's not only the parent pushing the chips, but I think in my dad's case, he realized he couldn't be the voice that spoke into it.
Yes.
And he was willing to let others come in and speak.
Yeah. Well, and it's family. He's like, this is your family. So we're going to deal with this right now. Everybody's at the table. Yeah.
But there was a humility about how he did it that
totally.
I think, and I think there was a wisdom that I'm just like, I wonder, because every other time it would always be my dad lecturing and sermonizing all over the place. I don't remember him saying a word that night.
Yeah. Yeah, he had. Well, my hunch is he prayed a bit before that. I'm willing to bet. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I'm willing to bet he prayed and he was like, I think this is the thing. We're going to do this.
Yeah.
That sounds like a plan birthed in prayer.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, zoom all the way forward. Now you have this thing. You're following Jesus. I'm all in, and now Crew is like your world. Now I'm in. This is the world I'm in. And
so ironically, there's a lot of stuff that happens in college. I had a lot of fun in ministry.
Yeah.
I did okay in class. I mean, but I didn't put all my effort there. It wasn't my priority.
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to do enough to get my degree.
Right.
And I had a lot to learn. Looking back, I was like, I wish I would have had a better perspective that I could have done ministry in class more instead of just in the dorms. Sure.
Yeah.
Because, Crew is that very ministry-minded model.
Yep.
Where you go get in the dorms, you share your faith, and you lead Bible studies, you disciple. Yep. If you're a man, you disciple men. If you're a woman, you disciple women.
Yep.
And I threw my life into it, and it was a joy. And I learned a lot. Along the way, I realized I was good at it and really enjoyed it. And so one of the things as we move forward, staff members would talk to me about, what are you doing after college, et cetera, et cetera. And I would always say, I'm going to law school. Like that was the plan.
Yep.
But then I went on this thing called the Summer Project with Crew. It was basically a summer mission project. You'd be in a house with a bunch of other college students, mentored by staff for a few weeks, and then staff would leave, and then you carry on the project for the summer. So I was in Ocean City, New Jersey, and one of the guys I got to know was a super cool cat. He kind of took me under his wing and just became a big brother to me. Later that year, in the fall, he emails me, when email was a thing back then. And he said, hey, Jason, they pulled aside a group of us seniors for a weekend conference thing. And they presented this thing called the Millennial Pledge to us. And they're gonna roll it out fully at Christmas conference. And so this was 97 or 98, I don't remember which. And then he just simply said, I know you well enough to know you're not going to make an emotional decision. Because growing up Pentecostal, I feel like all I saw were people making emotional decisions.
Yep.
And so for me, it was like, I'm not going to be forced into a decision just because of emotion. So he knew me well enough in that summer, and he was like, I want you to look over it. So that way you know what you want to do when Christmas conference comes, because it will probably be an emotional event. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so I looked at it, and it was just a simple form that just said, in light of the Lordship of Jesus Christ, I will give 1 year of my life to full-time Christian ministry by the end of the year 2000. I was like, prayed about it. I was like, that makes sense. I could do that. I could, defer, grad school or law school, whatever was coming next for the sake of 1 year. So that's what I did. They presented at a Christmas conference, and they had these papers that everyone was signing that have people bring it to the altar. People are bawling and crying and all this stuff. For me, I'd already made the decision because I knew it was coming.
Right.
So I just signed the paper and I walked it up over people, kneeling down on the floor, praying. I'm trying to walk around and I just put paper back on the altar and then I come back to my seat. And I'm like, okay, Lord, where? I'm thinking, I'm an all-in personality. So when I'm all in, I'm literally all in. I'm thinking Afghanistan. I'm thinking all the hard places. Two names come to mind, and they're two of my best friends, two guys that I live with, and neither of them had any desire to do overseas missions. One of them, I didn't even know if he had a desire to do ministry. So one was Austin and one was Jared. And so I said, Lord, if this is you, I will pray. And I trust that you'll bring them to me because I have no idea why their names are on my heart. So that's what I did. Every week I prayed for them for the next year. Austin came with me on the summer mission project again the next summer. And during the summer mission project, they have an international week. And so he's like, hey, man, can we go for a walk on the beach? I'm like, really? Just you and me? Are we going there? And he's like, shut up. And I'm like, all right. So as he's shared what the Lord's doing on his heart, and he's just like, hey, I think I want to go overseas. Yeah. And I said, really? I was like, you think your mom's going to let you? Yeah. He's like, I'll deal with that fight later. And he was just like, and I was like, he's like, would you consider going with me? And I said, let me think about that. Yeah. And he's like, wait, aren't you going to take time? I was like, dude, I've been praying for you for a year.
Yeah, that's cool.
And he's like, that's crazy. I'm like, so who else are you thinking? He names off a bunch of our friends. And the last one was Jared. And they just started laughing. And I was like, he's like, what's so funny? I was like, you'll find out when it happens.
Yeah.
And so Jared then lived with us the next year, and Austin would just hammer him.
Yeah. Like, come on, man, let's go. Right.
Yeah. And I would just be like, nah, it's up to you, man. Do what you want. The next year, Jared was like, I want to go with you guys.
Wow.
And I was like, that's really cool. I was like, so where are we going? Because I have no idea. And they both had this desire to be in because of our partnership with Crew and because of their relationship with the man who was discipling them.
Yep.
And so I was like, okay, I guess I'm going on, And and the rest of the team came together. So there was 4 guys, 4 girls on that team. And I was the only, of the men, I was the only one who had never seen the country or been to the country.
Right.
But my first time I'd touch down a country, I'd be there for a year. Ironically, those 3 guys are 3 of my best friends from that time of my life, and I love them for life. I've lost touch with Jared over the years just because of different roads ahead that we had. But ironically, of those 4 guys that went, I was the only one that went back again. So I fell in love with the country. And then I ended up going back another 3 years when I actually had a family. So I spent 5 years of my life.
Wow. Amazing.
And so, yeah. And it's funny what the Lord will do with community. That's one thing I've learned. Like, you think you have certain ideas of what it looks like, and then all of a sudden, the Lord uses people to lead your lives in so many different ways. And I thank God, some of the best and hardest years of my life.
Wow. And it was mostly like Bible studies, church planting, because that's not like a place you're supposed to go.
Yeah. First 2 years when I was with Crew, we were just doing English teaching and leading campus ministries. Then the next couple years, like when I went back with a different organization, we did humanitarian aid, and it was wonderful.
That's so cool.
I got to see more of a holistic gospel. Yeah. And understand that the gospel can transform communities. Yeah, that was just awesome.
That's so cool. So you're married with kids. Then you come back. You come back and live back in Ohio. So
so it was 2 years there with stint.
Yep.
And then 3 more years of full-time staff at Michigan State. Got married in that time. Started having kids.
Mm-hmm.
Was dating, got engaged, got married, then left staff, and then was just back in Central Ohio. Started being at a local church here. In college, I got really involved in the Vineyard again because my sisters were involved in the Vineyard and I knew about it.
Yep.
But at the time, it was too much for my spouse at the time.
Mm-hmm.
She grew up Brethren, so it was just a little too weird for her in her mind. That's fine.
Yeah.
Everybody's different.
Yep.
So we found this space, this other church that's somewhere in between the world of Vineyard and the world of Brethren. And it was a good church for us. Had kids. Then they started putting together a team of people to go back. They had asked me to come on staff after being involved with the church for a year. And so we were helping with the church plant they were doing in Delaware, Ohio. Mm-hmm. And then after some more time, they wanted to send families overseas. And so they ended up sending families back. So that's how I got involved in the humanitarian aid side.
Yeah.
And then that's where a lot of heartache came,
Yeah.
There was a lot of pain. So after we got back in the end of 2015, just trying to figure out life, just trying to reestablish life back in the States. Mm-hmm. After being gone back, we just had a lot of hard stuff happen. Mm-hmm. Health stuff with kids, difficulties just acclimating at times. It's a weird bag of stuff that happened.
Yeah, right.
But we came back and we were pretty in a lot of distress as a family. And so I realized like my time overseas was probably done for a while. Maybe most likely forever. And then my spouse at the time was going through a whole deconstruction of faith. Mm-hmm. And some of the stuff she felt and experienced overseas didn't help her. And yeah, it was a really hard space. And after a while, she just felt it was best to be done with our marriage. And so at first I tried to fight it and tried to stay in it. But then I realized I don't think she'd ever be free until she could figure it out on her own away from me. And so, had to go through a divorce. Don't wish it upon anybody.
Yeah.
But it was the darkest time of my life, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I learned a lot about the things I thought I knew and realized the only thing I could hold on to was Jesus in the moment.
Yeah.
And so, it was a time of needed growth in my life. And that's where when we came back from overseas, I had some friends here in Delaware, Ohio, who were just like, hey, if you're moving back up here, be with us at Delaware City Vineyard. They were just honest. They were like, we feel like it's a place that you could find healing. And I'm like, all right, that's fine. So I come to Delaware City Vineyard. After all that, I have 4 kids. My ex-wife is not wanting to go to church at all, and understandably so. She's been through a lot.
Yeah.
And so I was a wreck, and I went to church, and I was dealing with so much frustration with myself, anger with myself, shame, guilt, feelings of failure, just because I didn't know how I felt like I failed God in so many ways. And so we were there maybe a month or so, and then I finally met Rob Morgan, and he's like, I've heard bits and parts of your stories from other people, and I just want to let you know. He's like, there is no expectation except for you just to show up and just let the Lord heal you in His way, in His time.
Yeah.
That effect. And he's like, if you ever want to serve, that's fine, but don't force yourself.
Right.
We have no expectation. I think that first 6 months, I don't think there was a ministry time that I just didn't take up prayer,
Yeah.
and just bawled.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, go get it where you can get it. If you're falling apart, like, I don't know, these people pray, I could use that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever the call.
Yeah. And so we were there all of 16, and then in 17, my ex asked for the divorce, and so we worked through that. But it was just it was a painful piece. Took an extended couple years to finalize everything, and through it all, like, I'd cart the kids to church, and the community at Delaware City, Vineyard just rallied. They loved on my kids. They loved on me. They gave me space to be a full-fledged mess every time I showed up. And there was a season when I was going through the heart of all the stuff with the divorce that Rob, sat me down. He's like, Jason, he's like, I know you know how to lead men. I hear it in the way people talk about you. He's like, but do you know how to lead yourself through this? And I was like, no, I have no idea.
Right. Yeah.
So that's when he pitched EF to me. And so I went and felt even more undone.
Yeah.
But felt open to this space of saying, okay, Lord, I don't know what's next. But I'm open to being remade and reformed in the way you want me to.
And what kind of work are you doing in this window?
So ironically, after the 17, I was just looking for work, trying to figure out how to get out of ministry and use the gifts that I had. So I started off with selling insurance. Did really well. But it was funny because I told myself I would never sell insurance because it's what my dad did for a while.
That's how that works. Yeah.
Yeah, it always works that way.
Right.
The vows we make. Anyway.
Yeah, totally.
But it was hard because I was trying to carry insurance for all 4 kids. And it was basically the Obamacare back at the time. And it was a chunk of my paycheck all the time. And it just was making things untenable. So someone told me about doing commercial sales, and I was like, you know what, I could do that. And so I started selling for Spectrum, and I made a killing doing it. But the hours they wanted you to do were afternoons and evenings. And so my goal was to try and meet or beat my numbers, so that way I could do a 4 or 5 day work week.
Right.
But even with those, if there was a week that I had to have that 6th day, I had to work 6 days a week. And so it just became really hard on the kids and going through all the stuff we were going through. So then a friend of mine finally said, why don't you think about fundraising? Like, you're good with people. You did fundraising when you were in missions.
Yep. Why
not think about doing it full time? I'm like, who's going to pay me enough to support 4 kids?
Right.
And they said, oh, you can do it educationally. Like, go to Ohio State. And I'm like, why would they want me? I'm not an ex-athlete.
Right.
And they said, no. Every college at the university and even the hospital has their own team of development officers. I'm like, oh. So that's how I ended up transitioning into fundraising. So this whole time, like, I'm dealing with this mess, I'm also learning a new career.
Right.
So when Rob came to me with EF, it just made sense because, like, I need something.
Yeah, I need something to work on my soul. Yeah, right. Totally.
So, yeah. And that's where I was. And as time started to progress, I started to see that the Lord was just helping me find my feet again.
It's so good. So then you're doing donor development, which is a whole world. I mean, that would be good for us to spend the rest of our time thinking about. But and you are recently married.
Yes, I am, and it's been an amazing story of redemption in so many ways.
Yes.
She was my new wife, Jill. She's a rock star, and I absolutely adore what the Lord's done with her and my kids.
What a gift!
It is a gift. It is a gift. Because it's great to have a partner who represents so much redemption in my heart.
let's do a little on how donor development works, because
Sure.
you've now taken this new position for us in the Vineyard, which historically in the Vineyard we've never done any donor development ever.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the 3% churches give. That's kind of what we have. We've only maybe in the last, I think, 7 years filed for some grants, almost all through Lily, because Lily is incredibly generous. And if you create ministry initiatives that they can get behind to support pastors or any number of things. So we've done that, but that's sort of been a one-off. But there's a whole world of donor development that hospitals, universities, nonprofits, and Christian ministries have lived in. Not just parachurch ministries, denominations, all kinds of folks. Missions agencies, of course, that honestly in the Vineyard, we've just not really been in.
Which is honestly shocked me.
Well, I it's interesting about anyone not in the Vineyard. I say that too. They're like, wait a minute. How are you guys doing anything at all? And I'm like, well, we have the 3% and da-da-da. And they're like, yeah, but like, you're the Vineyard. Like, you guys are like a big deal, and you have like this huge footprint. You've had such an impact on people's lives, and people would want to support you, whether it was through worship or conferencing or the ways you guys have done training and ministry. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And for me, I mean, just so I don't know if I've even told you this yet, but for me, I started to bump into folks around these worlds through stuff I was doing with like city officials, government. I get to know some of the different folks in universities, also some in different nonprofits, and they're describing all the stuff they do. Like, yeah, we have this kind of banquet and we have this other kind of thing. And then I start bumping into different humanitarian organizations that do fundraising and donor development. And I'm like, oh, and they just start talking like really casually, like, oh yeah, this is how this works, and da da da. And I'm like, what do you mean? How did you learn this? And they're like, well, this is just how everything works. I'm like, no, not for me. I've never learned any of this. The only thing I'd ever seen by way of donor development was a building campaign. I've been to Columbus Vineyard. I'd watched how that kind of worked. Anyway, so they recommend to me I think it was someone in the hospital system, that there was a thing called Institute for Charitable Giving. Have you ever seen these guys? Gerald Panis was the guy who ran this.
I've heard of him, yeah.
Anyway, so they said, you should check this out. So I look it up, and I felt like God kind of spoke to me. It was weird. I was like reading the website, and they had like a 2-day seminar you could go to in California. And I just signed up, sight unseen. Just did it.
So was this before or after you took the national director spot?
Oh, way before.
Okay,
this is like... this is like 8 years ago.
Okay.
Maybe even a little more. So I take this thing, and I'm like, I don't know. I go to this hotel, and you go in, and they just start doing, the first thing they do is just all the statistics, like what percentage comes from major gifts versus regular giving, da da da. And they just, I get like a crash course in all of this, and and then it's a lot of role playing. So it's like, okay, sit with this person, talk about what the vision is for your organization. And and it's a hospital person next to me and somebody from a school, and, and most of them were already in donor development. So this is their job. And within minutes, I realized, I think I'm the only person here, like, who's me. Like, I'm just a local pastor. And we'd started a couple nonprofits. Anyway, they had this thing called bench time where you could sign up to sit with Gerald, or he had like another guy. So I signed up and I sat down with him, and he looks at me and he goes, I think you're the very first pastor I've ever known to sign up for this. And he says, and I have been wanting someone to sign up. He goes, because I'm a believer and I've helped raise money for different nonprofits and churches. He says, you have the most important thing in the world to raise money for. and to build relationships with. How can I help you? And I said, well, let me tell you what I'm doing. Let me tell you what I'm dreaming about and and I just start laying out stuff. And he gave me like a theology right there. He starts working 1 Timothy. He goes, right out of his mind, warn those who are rich in this present age to not put their hope in wealth, which will pass away. He says, you have a duty to disciple people, specifically those who have more money. You have a duty to disciple them to be generous, even if it's not for what you do. So in other words, it might not even be for you that they give their money. But you have a duty to disciple people that have expendable income, which, by the way, is almost every American, but especially those who have lots of money, because it threatens to destroy their soul. They'll be injured. That's what this text says. If they don't have a means of having that wealth count for something beyond themselves, and specifically for what it means to care for the least of these and or to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. So this guy just preaches a little sermon at me, and I am like wrecked. I get up from this little conversation like, wow, there's like a world here. I mean, like, it's like a world. There's like, and then I hear about it's the Institute. Is the Institute for Generous Giving folks. There's like a whole world of like Christian philanthropists who think about how foundations work. And anyway, so I go on this little crash course, and I come back to my Vineyard friends, and I said, "There's like a world here that we don't know about." And they're like, "I don't know. That's for like big deal folks, and we can't really do that." But we start applying some of those principles in our local church, and that helps us lead to plant all kinds of churches and help build nonprofits and do all this stuff just at a local level. And then, of course, as I've taken this role, part of the, you had to write all these things and do videos as you were they were looking at candidates for national director. And this was a big piece of what I added in is, I think there's opportunities here that we've not taken a hold of.
Yeah.
So, and then in the reorg, we did a bunch of research towards that. And that reorg team, then approved by the executive team, put all of these different things in. So in a very real way, you're an answer to prayer, because then what people start saying is, well, there's nobody around the Vineyard that knows how to do this. There might be like some world out there, but that doesn't interact with Vineyard people. There's no Vineyard people that have been in donor development or know how to do this. And I was like, well, I mean, maybe not. I don't know. But let's ask the Lord and let's put the job out there, and then you appear with all your experience. So I only say all that to say, by way of background, I'm persuaded by the educational curve I've been on, and I don't know probably a tenth of what you know. But seriously, I really don't. I mean, I'm moonlighting mostly because I care. I care about the mission.
Yep.
And it blew my mind to realize how much wealth a lot of people have, how many foundations, are literally have to, quote unquote, give away money.
Yep.
How many of them care about Christian initiatives? Like, so there's foundations that won't, but there's many that do. They're like, no, this is designated for work with pastors or work with youth or work on behalf of homelessness or addiction recovery. I mean, they're designated. And they literally have like a shingle out saying, somebody come ask for this.
Yep. So it's really funny that you started talking about that way. So when I was working at the institution I was working at, Kenyon College, our plan giving officer would always say one thing that always shocked me. She goes, she was never worried about the number that we got on paper when it came to people's wills and trusts and bequests.
Right.
Simply because by the end of their life, more times than not, people have changed that number and it's actually grown because they've simply seen, oh, my kids are okay.
Yeah.
And so because of that, people will come back and say, oh, I'm going to give 3% to my college. And yet, I think the stat she used was 7 times out of 10, it's doubled what's on the paper.
Right.
The actual realized gift. And what goes to your point of showing that people have a lot more expendable income than they think.
Yes. Yep.
But it also comes back to the point that I think is even bigger. People want to leave legacy.
Yep.
People want to have an impact that outlasts themselves. And in a lot of ways, I feel like that is proof of, once again, that we are made in the image of God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like his fingerprints all over us to be creators, to create systems, to create blessing in other people's lives. And I don't think we realize those things are in us until we're forced to look at our mortality.
Yep. Yep.
And that's when a lot of things really come to the forefront. And so when, his name was Gerald, was talking to you about a theology of giving.
Yep.
I think it comes back even to the garden.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's just innate in us that when people are in a good space and they can actually start to take a stock of their lives, the natural question becomes, what am I going to do with all this?
Yeah. Yeah. Stewardship.
Right. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And it's teaching people, like, just like Gerald said, there's plenty of place to play. Mm-hmm. It can be anything. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be the church per se.
Yep.
And like when I was raising gifts for people at Kenyon, I told our alumni over and over again, I want you to give to Kenyon if that's what you want to do. But for me, it's more about the fact that you realize you can have an impact wherever you want to.
Yep.
And as soon as people started to hear that and realize that, the idea of Kenyon became more palpable to them. Yep. Because they wanted to replicate their experience for some other student.
That's right. This is what made a difference for them. So I'd love to help someone else. Yeah.
Yep. Or for them, it also opened them up to seeing that Kenyon opened up their lives to all these other experiences they've had in their life.
Yep.
And so they would give back in other ways. And so that's, for me, when I look at fundraising, donor development, it's just about helping people cultivate a vision that's bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
It's about helping people cultivate an understanding that everyone is invited to play. And actually, it is not only invited to play, but it's actually a benefit that everyone gets to play. Yep. And that it's actually going to benefit not only the people they impact, but it will benefit their own souls, just like you said.
Yeah. And so talk about, like, when you look at the vineyard, you're walking in right now, and you said the thing everybody says that's not in the vineyard that leads at an organizational level, at an executive level. They always say two things. They said two things to us in the reorg every single time we talked. One was they could not believe we did not have ordination. We had no mechanism by which nationally...
That surprised me too.
Yeah. It was all local. I mean, literally every single denomination leader of any kind was like, wait a minute, you don't even hold ordination? You don't even have the clear standards by which that a local church would enact that? We're like, no, I mean, we have a statement of faith. We have some things, but we don't have that. They'd be like, wow, that's unbelievable. They just couldn't get their mind around it. And then the second thing was, you don't have any kind of a donor development plan. And I'd be like, no. They'd be like, that can't be true. Surely you have at least like you at least have an annual giving ask. I go, no, we don't. It's like, well, you have at least an initiative-based ask. Like, hey, here's this special thing we want to do for missions, or here's the extra thing we want to do for church planting. I'm like, no, we don't have that either. I mean, they literally couldn't get their head around it. So when you walk in to this role and you look at the vineyard, where do you see, like, man, there is really amazing opportunity here? Or here's where I see the vineyard has had an impact that people want to contribute to. I mean, because you're thinking through all of those elements right now. Where are you seeing opportunity? Where are you seeing like how the Vineyard takes some steps?
So for me, like, as I've been looking through things, I think when it comes to church planning, I think that's the easiest way for people to really see the fruit of what they do. When it comes to giving, because they get to see a community impacted, not only from a standpoint of, oh, there's a church in the community, but there's actually a community of faith that will actually work to transform a city on all sorts of levels, whether it's the justice pieces that come about with what the Vineyard Justice Network has. That's the name of it, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Just making sure. There's so many acronyms. I'm still learning all the acronyms.
No, I get it. Yeah.
So even just what does that look like? Like thinking through what we do at Delaware City Vineyard, our feed pantry, our weekly food pantry that we make accessible to everybody. Yeah. Those are things that could be made available on larger levels as we plant more churches. Yep.
Yeah, it all gets concretized in there wasn't a church. Now there is a church.
Yeah. But it's mobilizing people to be part of the community. Yeah. And I think that's a part people often forget because so many people equate churches to buildings. And that's never been really the Vineyard ethos. Yep. The Vineyard ethos is the church is the people. Yep. I mean, that's why I think in some ways, that's why this autonomous feel of the Vineyard has been so focused on in some ways and prioritized, because we have this aversion to buildings. We have this aversion to organization, and we want it to be about the people. And I think that is actually one of the things that can be mobilized the fastest. Yeah. When you actually start to help people envision what could be. And that's what, honestly, donor development conversations do. And so when I look at it, I'm looking at the church planning pieces. I'm looking about the equipping of pastors. I know too many pastors who burn out. Not just Vineyard, but I was a former missionary. Yeah. I would be part of the statistics. Yeah. You know, and I just think about what would it look like to support pastors. Yep. And staff members with the development and the support they would need to continue their race for a lifetime. I mean, in my mind, there's a lot of opportunity that stems around just this idea of multiplying churches. Because if we're going to multiply churches the way God wants us to, it has to be more holistic. Yep. It can't just be about the numbers of people you send out and then the buildings they put up. Yep. Well, and that there's people that God has given grace to generate wealth in Vineyard churches right now. For sure. And they're in churches now. They love their local church. They give generously to their local church. They give to those initiatives as those come up, building campaign, or we're trying to do this work with kids or a feeding program or whatever. But they're also the kind of individual that has been given the kind of wealth or maybe even the kind of vision that's beyond even just their local church. So they're asking questions about maybe the country as a whole, or what does it mean we're a part of this thing called the Vineyard? How do we support, like you're saying, other churches like the one I'm in? You know, I care about other parts of the country, and is anybody thinking about that? Or how do I... But we've just never talked to them. And frankly, other people are talking to them. So the fact we don't talk to them means somebody else is going to. So there's going to be their college they graduated from, their
this or that humanitarian organization shows up and says, hey, we noticed you own a business and it seems that you have some expendable income and we're doing this work in Africa, or we have this project that we do with humanitarian aid. So many of these folks, my experience, at least this was a big learning curve for me. Many of these folks are used to people talking to them. So
I'd push back and say they are used to people talking to them, but they're not used to people talking to them about things they're already involved in.
Yes, that's right. That's true.
And that is the piece that if a person goes to the Vineyard, they only know what they're seeing.
Yes.
Or what they're being asked to see.
Yes. Yep.
And if they don't see they're part of a larger movement,
yeah,
they'll only expect, they only need my 10%.
Yeah, I guess this is it. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is fine. I like it. It's great.
Which is great. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. They're not upset about that. But nobody said to them, hey, there's these 3 things, or here's the way we're thinking about church planning, or here's how we're thinking about missions, or here's some ways to go be a part of da-da-da. They just nothing.
And I think people would love the opportunity to give towards something they not only care about, like people care about clean water in Africa.
Yes.
But to give towards something they care about and that they're actually participating in is a different story. It's a whole different level. It's a whole different level of passion that comes around it.
Well, and they've invested in it by way of their kids too. Mm-hmm. So that they're thinking about generations, if they're raising their kids and this kind of thing. I mean, the amount of people, as I started talking and saying, where do you think your kids are going to go to church? What kind of church do you think they're going to want to be in? Mm-hmm. The amount of those folks that go, oh, that is a different thought. I haven't really thought about that all the way. I want them to be in this kind of church. Well, here's what that means. Here's the kinds of things we're trying to do so that we can continue to care for kids and youth groups and college students, prepping new leaders to build, because your kids are probably not going to want to be pastored by me. They're going to be pastored by somebody younger than me. Well, how does that happen? Those folks have experiences like you described. They're at a camp. They are in a college small group. They are in a seminary training program, something. The people that are going to pastor your kids and your kids' kids right now need opportunities to grow into these things. And that requires resources for us to build those frameworks. And those are often beyond the local church. So it isn't just within the local church, but it's within this thing we call the Vineyard. So, and I'm amazed how many folks are like, oh yeah, well, I want to help with that. Or diversity. Everybody wants diversity. Okay, well, there's some things we're trying to do. We're building these associations that enable people to come together and get training and be connected in this thing called the Vineyard. People are like, oh, well, I want that. I'd love to help with that. It's like, but you have to describe vision. You have to create concrete ways for it to happen, which is what we're doing. And it's what I'm super excited about you helping to contribute, because like I said, I mean, there's a learning curve here, because, a local pastor, when they hear this, can say, we're going to talk to people in our church. Like, well, what if they stop giving to our church? Well, that would be that would be a catastrophe. We don't want that.
Yeah.
But there are people that are asking other kinds of questions that we want to make available the Vineyard as they're thinking about what they're doing with these other gifts, whether it's in their will or, So as you think about that, what are some of the ways that, there's 2 groups that I'd love you to talk to. One is your local pastor. You're trying to think through, how do I disciple? How do I connect to people like this? I have a business owner. I've got someone who has generational wealth. They're in our church, but I don't know. Is is it weird for me to talk to them about this? Like, am I allowed to bring this up? Like, that feels funny because a lot of pastors are nervous around these conversations. So, and then there also are those people. What would you want to say to them? Like, hey, you're in a local vineyard. Let me, so those are two groups that I'd love, because you've interacted with these kinds of people for years and years and years.
Sure. So for pastors, I would simply say, if you're willing to mentor someone through how they live their life in marriage, how they live their life as a parent, how they live their life in the community as a neighbor, why wouldn't the conversation of how do you live your life following Jesus with the resources you have come up?
Yep.
In some ways, I would challenge some pastors who may not have those individual conversations.
Yeah.
That you're neglecting part of your stewardship of that person as part of your flock. Because Jesus calls us to give all of our lives.
Yeah.
And that's even the things that we have in our house, the bank accounts we have, the stocks we have. Like, those are supposed to be all under the lordship of Jesus.
Yes.
And that's a conversation where I think it's easy to have from the pulpit when you have scripture in your hands.
Yeah.
I think it becomes an awkward conversation for so many people when you're sitting across the table. Because you don't want to have that conversation. But I would be willing to say that to the other side of the spectrum, to those people who do find themselves in that category of, I do have the bank accounts, I do have the stocks, I do have the assets. I think those people want to hear, oh, you're right. These are all gifts from God.
Yeah.
So how can I use them as He would see fit?
Yes.
And that's the question I would say should be a conversation of what is it that God is doing in the moment? And how can I partner with it?
Yep.
We ask that question so easily when it comes to serving others or character development. But I think we hedge on that conversation when it comes to money, when it comes to assets, because we've been trained not to talk about money in ministry because it's not kosher.
Right.
Or people think it's too private a conversation. But the reality is, Jesus challenges it himself. He says, you cannot serve two masters.
Yep.
You cannot serve God and money.
Yep.
And you kind of wonder why there are so many pithy sayings around money that Jesus had. Where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. Store up treasures in heaven, not on this earth.
Yep.
Like, he's got a bunch of them. You got to wonder why.
Well, he talks about money a lot as a way of understanding spiritual realities too. So
yeah,
he's pretty comfortable doing that.
And he did it in the big groups and he did it in the individuals.
Yep.
Rich young ruler.
Yep.
Like, that was a conversation that could have looked a lot different, but he chose to go a certain way.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, go sell what you have and follow me.
Yeah. And I think I mentioned it earlier, but it bears repeating. The turnkey for me was people that have a lot of wealth or a lot of influence are in a different kind of danger spiritually. Because they really are. There's a sort of self-reliance. There's an entitlement. The world around them will generally surround them with yes men and people that, they don't have to listen to anybody that challenges them if they don't want to. That puts them in a certain kind of danger. And so if you have access as a pastor to care for people's hearts, to say, okay, so you have extra wealth, you have extra influence, what does it mean to steward that as a follower of Jesus? Just to even ask that question, and then as a pastor say, how can I help you? What do you think? And if it's not me, then who?
Yeah, exactly.
And if it's not now, then when? Yep. Because unbeknownst to people like this, they get surrounded with people that just placate them and manage them and say what they want to hear. It's rare for them to find people like that will help them.
Can I add the flip side of that too?
Yeah.
Not only is there, as you say, a certain kind of detraction that can happen,
mm-hmm.
but I would say they've been actually invited to experience a different kind of blessing.
Yes.
And I don't think they see it that way.
Yeah, that's right.
When a person has so much when it comes to assets and wealth, they don't think about blessing because they have so much tangible stuff.
Yes, that's right.
But there is a blessing.
Yes.
That comes about when you are choosing to invest in the things that God is calling you to as an individual, whatever that is, whether that be the church or whether that be some sort of thing that, is going to move the needle in someone's life, whether it's clean water in Africa, whatever it is.
Yep.
There is a blessing that comes with it.
Yep.
That can't be measured.
No, it's powerful.
And I don't think people really understand that not only is it a blessing for them and their own soul,
mm-hmm.
but it's actually a blessing they're actually sowing into their kids and their legacy when their kids start to see that.
Yes.
And so I would say it's a both and.
It is. And, it's so funny, because when I started to learn this and then step into some of these conversations that I'd never really had. And the posture I'm describing of I really care about you. And I'm aware that you're carrying around some places that you could use some help with. You're not sure how to maintain your soul a certain way, probably in light of these things. And that's also influenced, by the way, people that, they have name recognition or they walk into a room and people turn and look. I mean, that isn't all great. It's a pretty strange way to live, and it's hard to keep your soul intact as a humble person, as a gracious person. You don't know how to trust people in the same way as people want something from you. So, and sometimes those go to others, sometimes they don't. But I was always amazed as I started in these conversations. I'm less amazed now because I've been doing this more, how often the person would look at me and say something like, I'm so glad we talked about this. I've been kind of waiting.
Yeah.
I've been wondering when we were going to have this conversation because I really would like to be helpful.
Yep.
But I didn't want to be weird. I didn't want to bring it up. I didn't want to put pressure on you, or I didn't want to. But it's almost like an elephant in the room for them because they're used to having conversations about what the initiatives are around them that people care about. And they're often confused by Christian pastors when they don't talk to them. They're like, it's kind of strange. I'm wondering what's going on here. And so I guess what I'd want to say to those folks, if you're in a church, you can help your pastor know how to do this. I mean, you can call up your pastor and say, hey, you might not know this, but I have a foundation, or there's ways that our family is really generous, really outside of what we even give in the church. And I could use your help on thinking through what is best for our city. What are some bigger dreams you think that are maybe a part of the Vineyard as a whole? Mm-hmm. I just want to raise my hand and say, I want to be really intentional, and you're my pastor, and I want to invite you into a conversation with me. Would you be willing to have that with me? Because that'll help a pastor kind of jump that speed bump. It's a speed bump. It's not a big bump, but you got to get over it, because sometimes your pastors just don't know that that's territory they're invited into. It's not territory many pastors are familiar with. But if you invite them in, you can start a different kind of relationship, even where you can get the help you need from your local church, caring for your soul, your family, because it is a different kind of discipleship that you have to invite in as much as pastors initiate. So That's my experience. That's what I've watched. That's what I've seen, even with folks in our local church, or as I meet people in other churches. I mean, the amount of times I meet people and I'm like, so you own these 4 businesses. You're also a pastor. You may not know this, but you have massive influence in these people's lives. Mm-hmm. Not just in how you pay, but how you think about their insurance plans, how you think about their retirement plans.
How you think about their simple personal development and work.
Exactly.
Like,
yes.
Are you creating a good career roadmap for them?
That's exactly right. Those are huge things that they're like, oh, I just gave them bonuses. I thought that was generous. And I'm like, yeah, that's good too. But you have an influence that I think your local pastor could help you steward. And I'm not saying you're going to wear Christian t-shirts or, invite everybody to church. I'm saying you really care for them intentionally because of the life Jesus has given to you. Mm-hmm. You can care for them out of that life, but that's a different set of skills that you might not have been developing.
Yep.
And you could even hire somebody to help you with that if you have enough expendable income to have somebody who takes care of your staff. I mean, they effectively work like a chaplain if it's a large enough company. And I've been watching, there's more and more of that happening because the mental health things that are happening in America are so severe.
For sure.
So there's all kinds of ways that people like this in our churches can have influence that I think our job as pastors is to help them think about that and to care for them and the unique challenges that they have. I know we only see it as opportunities, but there are challenges. It's tricky to live like this. Well, Jason, we could talk forever, and hopefully we can get another one where we can talk through all the things we're doing with this, because we're all starting all these things as we're working towards the national conference. So I'll book us for another one that we can talk through all the different things that we're doing. But I can't tell you how grateful I am for you being willing to step into this moment in the Vineyard. Hearing your story connects a lot of dots for me too. It really does, to your heart for even the different initiatives that we're stepping into in the Vineyard. They're found in your story. It's really cool to hear that.
I feel like, a lot of this is the one thing I've learned over the years. The more I'm willing to own the brokenness in my life, the more I'm willing to see God's healing play out through it and overflow those spaces. Yeah. And so, I'm excited about what's coming down the pike. I'm excited about the impact that my role can have, but I'm also more so excited about what's ahead for the Vineyard. Yeah. When it comes to all the things that are there, I think it's a game changer. Amen. I'm really excited.
Yeah, me too. Well, grateful for you, and I appreciate making time. I'll hit you up again because I think it would be great for us to have a whole long chunk I'm thinking through, because I know we've got all these little lanes we're working through, but for us to process all those and invite the whole Vineyard in that conversation, that'd be fun.
So, that'd be fun.
Cool.
I'm in.
All right. We'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, bro.
The We Are Vineyard podcast is a production from the team at Vineyard USA. If you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. Leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Connect with us online for additional resources. Our website is vineyardusa.org, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at VineyardUSA. Thanks for listening. See you next week.